Long before the mighty Persian Empire etched its legacy into human history, the Iranian plateau was a crossroads of wandering tribes, ancient alliances, and cultures whose roots ran deep into prehistory. The story of Persia doesn't begin with royal palaces or grand conquests. It begins with movement. A slow, steady migration of Indo-Iranian peoples who journeyed across vast grasslands, setting the stage for one of civilization's greatest empires. Around the early 2nd millennium BCE, waves of Indo-European migrants began drifting out from the steppes north of the Black and Caspian Seas. Among them were the Indo-Iranians, the ancestors of the Indo-Aryans in India, and the Iranian peoples of modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. These were not sudden invasions, but gradual shifts, driven by climate change, survival, and opportunity. They spoke early forms of the Indo-European language family, which over centuries would evolve into Sanskrit in India and Old Persian and Avestan in Iran. Wherever they went, they carried with them a distinctive culture, mastery of the horse, a warrior-based social hierarchy, and spiritual traditions centered on the forces of nature and the cosmic balance between order and chaos. Echoes of these beliefs survive in the ancient Iranian scripture known as the Avesta, one of humanity's earliest sacred texts. By the late 2nd millennium BCE, groups of Indo-Iranians had begun to settle across the Iranian plateau, a rugged region of deserts and mountains offering both hardship and refuge. Over time, these settlers divided into separate tribes, the Medes, the Persians, the Parthians, and the Bactrians. Though each tribe developed its own customs and territories, they shared linguistic roots and spiritual kinship. The Medes established themselves in the northwest, in what we now call Media, while the Persians, then a smaller and less powerful group, settled farther south in a land they called Parsa, known to the Greeks as Persis, and today as Fars, in southern Iran. These early Iranian societies were tribal in nature. Power rested in the hands of local chieftains, bound together by clan loyalties and kinship. Life revolved around herding, warfare, and agriculture. Yet within these simple structures, the seeds of empire were already taking root. To the west lay Mesopotamia, home of ancient city-states, monumental temples, and written laws. The Iranians traded, fought, and learned from civilizations like the Assyrians, Elamites, and Babylonians, absorbing their techniques of governance and architecture. To the east, contact with Central Asian cultures brought trade and new ideas. The early Iranians did not live in isolation. They adapted and transformed the influences that surrounded them. One of the oldest neighboring civilizations was Elam, centered around the city of Susa. Elamite culture had flourished since the 3rd millennium BCE, and though distinct from the Iranian newcomers, centuries of interaction followed. Elamite writing and administrative systems likely influenced the bureaucratic traditions that later defined Persian rule. Even under the Achaemenids, the Elamite language remained one of the empire's official tongues. Meanwhile, to the northwest, the Assyrians were expanding. As their empire pushed eastward into the Zagros Mountains, they encountered the Median tribes, fierce mountain warriors who proved difficult to subdue. By the 9th and 8th centuries BCE, the Medes were uniting under strong local leaders. According to later Greek sources, by the 7th century BCE, they had formed a centralized kingdom with its capital at Ecbatana, modern-day Hamadan. Greek historian Herodotus credits a leader named Deioces with uniting the Median tribes and founding their first state. Though details are uncertain, what is clear is that the Medes were emerging as a formidable power, laying the first stones of an Iranian empire. The Persians, meanwhile, remained less prominent. Assyrian records mention them as Parswash or Perwa, living in the southwestern highlands, minor allies or vassals to the Medes. But while the world overlooked them, they were learning, absorbing ideas, strategies, and systems of power that would soon change history. Through religion, these scattered Iranian peoples found unity. Across tribes, a shared belief endured, the eternal struggle between light and darkness, order and chaos. This ancient worldview would later crystallize into Zoroastrianism, founded by the prophet Zarathustra, Zoroaster, whose teachings, emerging sometime between the 2nd and 1st millennia BCE, would become the moral and spiritual heart of the Persian Empire. By the early 7th century BCE, a new kind of warfare was transforming the region. The Iranians, masters of the horse, had developed the art of mounted combat, combining speed, precision, and strategy. These were the skills that would one day power the conquests of Cyrus the Great and Darius the Great, forging an empire that stretched across 3 continents. By the dawn of the 7th century BCE, the political map of the ancient Near East was undergoing massive change. At its heart stood the Assyrian Empire, a ruthless, militarized power that dominated the region through terror, tribute, and relentless campaigns of conquest. But even empires built on fear eventually crack. And in the mountains to the east, a new force was gathering strength, the kingdom of Media. The Medes, one of the Iranian tribes descended from those early Indo-Iranian settlers, had begun to organize into a confederation strong enough to challenge Assyrian dominance. From their strongholds in the Zagros Mountains, they evolved from scattered tribes into a unified kingdom capable of standing toe-to-toe with the great powers of the day. According to Herodotus, the first true king of the Medes was Darius, a man famed for his wisdom and sense of justice. Legend says he was chosen by his people to bring order to a chaotic land. He centralized power, built the great city of Ecbatana as his capital, and established the foundations of the first Iranian monarchy. Modern historians debate the details, but the larger truth remains. Under Darius, the Medes began their transformation from tribal society to centralized state. Darius was succeeded by his son Phraates, who expanded Median power and brought neighboring peoples, including the Persians, under his rule. At this time, the Persians were still a small vassal kingdom, serving the Medes, but learning from their rise. As the Medes consolidated power, the Assyrian Empire was starting to crumble from within. Decades of brutal expansion had stretched its resources thin. Rebellions erupted in Babylon, Elam, and other provinces long oppressed by Assyrian rule. The once unstoppable empire had begun to decay. Then came Cyaxares, perhaps the most formidable of the Median kings. Ascending the throne in the early 6th century BCE, he reorganized the Median military, dividing it into specialized units of infantry, archers, and cavalry, giving his army a discipline and coordination that rivaled even the mighty Assyrians. For the first time, the Medes had an army that could not only defend, but conquer. Around 612 BCE, Cyaxares forged an alliance with Babylon's king Nabopolassar, uniting 2 great enemies of Assyria. Together, the Medes and Babylonians launched a campaign that would alter the balance of the ancient world. After years of war, their combined armies laid siege to Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, a city once thought impregnable. The battle was long and brutal, but in the end, Nineveh fell. The city was burned, its empire shattered, and its people scattered. The fall of Assyria sent shockwaves across the ancient Near East. For the first time in centuries, the world's most feared empire was gone, and in its place, Media and Babylon rose as the dominant powers. The Medes claimed the northern lands of Mesopotamia and eastern Anatolia, while the Babylonians took control of the south. For a brief and brilliant moment, Media stood at the height of its power. From the Halys River in central Anatolia to the Zagros Mountains, their empire stretched wide, a vast confederation of peoples and lands united by force and alliance. But even at its peak, the Median state was fragile. It lacked the administrative structure that would later define Persia. The Medes ruled through tribal loyalties and dynastic marriages, not through a centralized bureaucracy. Their empire was powerful, but unstable. Cyaxares was succeeded by his son Astyages, the last king of the Medes. Astyages inherited a kingdom both rich and restless. The alliance with Babylon was faltering, internal divisions were growing, and new challenges were emerging, most notably from the Persians, their former vassals in the south. Among those Persians was a young leader named Cyrus, from the Achaemenid dynasty, a man whose destiny would reshape the ancient world. He was the grandson of Astyages through his mother, Mandane, giving him royal blood from both Media and Persia. According to tradition, Astyages had disturbing dreams foretelling that Cyrus would one day overthrow him. In fear, he sought to destroy the boy. But destiny, as history often proves, is not easily denied. Years later, Cyrus the Great would rise in open revolt against his Median overlord, uniting Persian tribes, rallying old allies, and igniting a revolution that would end one empire and give birth to another. In the mid-6th century BCE, the balance of power in the ancient Near East shifted once again. From a small, rugged corner of southwestern Iran, a leader emerged who would forever change the course of history. Cyrus II of Persia, known to the world as Cyrus the Great. Born into the Achaemenid dynasty, Cyrus inherited both Persian and Median blood. His father, Cambyses I, ruled the Persian city of Anshan, while his mother, Mandane, was the daughter of Astyages, the king of Media. This dual heritage gave Cyrus legitimacy in both worlds, and perhaps even destiny in his veins. When Cyrus came to power, Persia was still a vassal of the Median Empire. But beneath the surface, tension was building. The Medes had grown complacent. Their once great empire was beginning to fracture under its own weight. Among the Median elite, discontent simmered, especially among generals and nobles who had grown weary of Astyages' rule. According to ancient records such as the Nabonidus Chronicle and the writings of Herodotus, Cyrus led a rebellion against his grandfather Astyages around 550 BC. The conflict was fierce, but decisive. Many Median nobles, including the powerful general Harpagus, defected to Cyrus's side, turning the tide in Persia's favor. In the final confrontation, Astyages was defeated and captured. Ecbatana, the great Median capital, fell without being destroyed. But Cyrus did not seek vengeance. Instead of erasing the Medes, he absorbed them, preserving their structures, their officials, even their culture. He made Ecbatana one of his royal capitals and incorporated Median administrators into his new government. This was the first sign of what would define Cyrus's reign: pragmatism, inclusion, and vision. The fall of Media marked more than the collapse of a kingdom. It was the birth of the Persian Empire, a new power that would soon stretch across 3 continents and reshape the known world. With the Medes now united under his rule, Cyrus turned outward. His ambitions extended far beyond the Iranian plateau. In a series of brilliant campaigns, he began to expand the Persian realm, not merely through conquest, but through diplomacy, respect, and reform. His first great challenge came from Lydia, a wealthy kingdom in western Anatolia ruled by King Cyrus, famed for his riches and alliances with Babylon, Egypt, and even Sparta. Cyrus underestimated the speed and strategy of this rising Persian power. Around 547 BCE, Cyrus led his forces westward, meeting Croesus's army at the Battle of the Halys River, also known as the Battle of Thymbra. Though the Lydians fought bravely, Cyrus's tactics and mobility overwhelmed them. Croesus retreated to his capital, Sardis, believing he could regroup in spring. But Cyrus struck swiftly, besieging and capturing the city before winter's end. With Lydia conquered, its legendary wealth and the Ionian Greek cities along the coast fell into Persian hands. It was not only a victory of arms, but of strategy, an empire expanding through intelligence as much as force. After securing the west, Cyrus turned his eyes eastward. His armies advanced into Central Asia, bringing regions like Bactria, Sogdiana, and Parthia under Persian control. Each campaign extended not only his borders, but his influence, connecting trade routes, spreading administration, and weaving together a vast, multi-ethnic empire. But perhaps his most remarkable achievement came in Babylon, the jewel of Mesopotamia. By 539 BCE, Babylon had grown unstable under King Nabonidus, whose religious policies had alienated priests and citizens alike. When Cyrus marched on the city, he did not present himself as a conqueror, but as a liberator. According to the Cyrus Cylinder, one of history's most important inscriptions, he declared that the Babylonian god Marduk himself had chosen him to restore justice and order. The Persian army entered Babylon peacefully. There was no destruction, no bloodshed. Cyrus respected the local traditions, restored temples, and even allowed displaced peoples, including the Jews exiled by earlier Babylonian kings, to return to their homelands. This policy of tolerance and restoration set Cyrus apart from the despots of the past. He ruled not through fear, but through trust. Under Cyrus, the Persian Empire became a model of enlightened rule. He allowed each region to keep its customs, language, and faith, so long as they remained loyal to the crown. He established an early administrative system with satraps, regional governors, and built the foundations of what would become the world's first truly global empire. In 529 BCE, after decades of conquest and leadership, Cyrus the Great fell in battle somewhere in the eastern frontier, perhaps against nomadic tribes near the Caspian Sea. He was buried at Pasargadae, in a simple but majestic tomb that still stands today. An inscription, perhaps apocryphal, yet timeless, reads, "O man, whoever you are and wherever you come from, for I know you will come. I am Cyrus, who founded the Persian Empire. Do not begrudge me this little earth that covers my body." Cyrus's reign was more than a series of victories. He had built not just an empire, but an idea that power could coexist with justice, and unity could arise from diversity. That vision would guide Persia for centuries to come. When Cyrus the Great passed away in 529 BCE, his vast empire, spanning from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, fell into the hands of his son, Cambyses II. Cyrus had built an empire on wisdom and tolerance. Cambyses inherited not just that empire, but the burden of proving himself worthy of it. Unlike his father, Cambyses was not content merely to consolidate. He sought conquest, ambitious, bold, and far-reaching. His eyes were fixed on Egypt, the ancient land of the pharaohs, a kingdom that had once stood as one of civilization's greatest powers. At that time, Egypt was ruled by Pharaoh Psamtik III, a young and inexperienced monarch from the 26th dynasty. His father, Amasis II, had maintained cordial ties with Cyrus, but after Amesis's death, those relations collapsed. Tensions rose quickly between Persia and Egypt, and Cambyses saw an opportunity. He prepared meticulously. Though Persia lacked a naval tradition, Cambyses forged crucial alliances with Phoenician and Cypriot sailors, who provided ships and seafaring expertise. He also secured cooperation from Arab tribes along the Sinai Peninsula, ensuring the safe passage of troops and water supplies through the desert. Every step was calculated. Every alliance was strategic. In 525 BCE, Cambyses launched his invasion. The decisive battle came near Pelusium, at the eastern edge of the Nile Delta. According to Herodotus, Cambyses employed a striking psychological tactic. His soldiers carried images of cats and other sacred animals before the battle, creatures the Egyptians worshipped. Fearing to harm their sacred symbols, the Egyptian army hesitated, and the Persians seized victory. Pharaoh Psamtik III fled, but was soon captured. With his defeat, Egypt, once a proud and independent power, became a province of the Persian Empire. Cambyses entered Egypt not as a destroyer, but as a ruler. He adopted the title of pharaoh, paid homage to the Egyptian gods, and respected local customs. He supported the temples, maintained religious ceremonies, and presented himself as the legitimate successor to Egypt's long line of kings. By doing so, he ensured relative peace and stability, at least for a time. Yet not all welcomed Persian rule. Egyptian sources later portrayed Cambyses as impious and cruel, accusing him of desecrating temples and executing priests. These claims, though likely exaggerated by later native writers, suggest the underlying resentment toward foreign authority that persisted despite his efforts to rule fairly. Beyond Egypt, Cambyses dreamed of expanding even further, into Nubia and the Siwa oasis, deep in the deserts of Africa. But the harsh terrain, limited supplies, and unreliable allies doomed those campaigns to failure. One Persian force, sent across the sands toward Siwa, famously vanished in a storm, its fate lost to time. While Cambyses was campaigning in Egypt, disturbing news reached him from Persia. A man claiming to be Bardia, his brother, had seized the throne. But there was a problem. According to official accounts, Cambyses had secretly ordered Bardia's death before leaving for Egypt, fearing a rebellion. If this man on the throne truly was Bardia, it meant Cambyses' crime had been discovered. If not, It meant a usurper had risen. Desperate to return and reclaim power, Cambyses began the long journey home. But before he could reach Persia, fate intervened. In 522 BCE, Cambyses too died under mysterious circumstances. Some say from an accidental wound by his own sword. Others whisper of suicide or assassination. Whatever the truth, his death plunged the empire into chaos. The man on the throne, whether Bardia or an impostor named Gaumata, as later claimed, ruled briefly. Across the empire, confusion spread. Some satraps declared loyalty to him, others prepared for war. The unity Cyrus had built, and Cambyses had stretched, was now hanging by a thread. And then, out of the turmoil, a new figure emerged. A nobleman from a lesser branch of the royal line. A soldier, organizer, and visionary, who would restore the empire's order and elevate it to new heights. His name was Darius. History would remember him as Darius the Great. The year was 522 BCE. Persia stood on the brink of collapse. Cambyses too was dead, and a man claiming to be his brother, Bardia, now sat on the throne. Across the empire, confusion reigned. Governors and generals hesitated. Was this truly the son of Cyrus the Great, or an impostor hiding behind his name? Into this chaos stepped Darius, son of Hystaspes, a member of a noble Persian family from the Achaemenid lineage, though of a lesser branch. Darius had served as a royal guard under Cambyses, part of the elite corps known as the Immortals. When he returned from Egypt and learned of the empire's turmoil, he took decisive action. According to Darius's own inscription carved high into the cliffs at Behistun, his personal declaration to history, the man ruling as Bardia was not the real prince, but a Magian priest named Gaumata, who had seized power by deception. Darius and 6 Persian nobles plotted to overthrow him. They stormed his stronghold, killed him, and proclaimed Darius king. The Behistun inscription tells this story not just as a political triumph, but as a divine mission. In it, Darius claims that Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of truth and order, had chosen him to restore justice and defeat the lie, a central concept in Zoroastrianism. Whether myth or reality, the message was clear. Darius was no usurper. He was the restorer of truth and the rightful heir to Cyrus's legacy. But taking the throne was only the beginning. The empire he inherited was fractured. Revolts erupted from Babylon to Media, from Elam to Egypt. In a single year, Darius fought 19 battles to put down these rebellions, recording each victory in the Behistun carvings. Names, places, and kings, all crushed beneath his rising power. Once stability returned, Darius turned from conqueror to architect. He knew that military strength alone could not sustain an empire that stretched thousands of miles. What he built next would define Persian greatness for generations. Darius divided the empire into provinces known as satrapies, each governed by a satrap or regional governor, often drawn from Persian nobility. These governors collected tribute, maintained order, and enforced royal law, but they were carefully watched. To prevent corruption and rebellion, Darius created a network of inspectors known to the Greeks as the king's eyes and ears. They could appear anywhere, unannounced, ensuring that loyalty to the great king never wavered. Under Darius, the empire's economy flourished. He standardized taxation, assigning fixed tribute amounts to each province, often paid in silver, gold, or agricultural goods. He also introduced a universal currency, the gold daric and the silver siglos, stamped with the image of the king as an archer. For the first time, merchants across 3 continents could trade with the same coin, creating one of the earliest global economies. To unite his vast dominion, Darius invested in infrastructure on an unprecedented scale. He built the Royal Road, stretching over 1,500 miles from Sardis in Anatolia to Susa in Persia. Along this route, relay stations, inns, and patrols allowed messages to cross the empire in a matter of days. Herodotus marveled that nothing mortal travels faster than Persian couriers. It was the lifeline of the empire, connecting cities, armies, and ideas. But Darius's vision extended beyond roads and tribute. He sought to immortalize Persia in stone. He commissioned the construction of Persepolis, a new ceremonial capital rising from the plain at the foot of the Zagros Mountains. Built on a massive terrace of carved rock, adorned with columns, reliefs, and sculptures depicting subjects from across the empire bringing gifts to the king, Persepolis symbolized unity through diversity. It wasn't just a palace, it was a statement. Persia was the heart of civilization. Religion, too, became a pillar of Darius's rule. Though he promoted Zoroastrianism, he never imposed it. He invoked Ahura Mazda in royal inscriptions, emphasizing truth, order, and divine favor, but allowed his subjects to worship their own gods. From Babylonian temples to Egyptian shrines, local traditions flourished under imperial protection. This religious tolerance became one of Persia's greatest strengths. It held a vast, multi-ethnic empire together through respect, not suppression. In Egypt, Darius even completed a project begun centuries earlier, a canal linking the Nile to the Red Sea, connecting the Mediterranean world to the Indian Ocean trade routes. On its banks, he left an inscription calling himself King of Kings, who united two seas. Darius also sent expeditions to map new lands, study rivers, and chart distant frontiers. He understood that knowledge was power, and power, when organized, was lasting. Yet his reign was not without conflict. In the late 6th century BCE, unrest brewed in the empire's far western provinces. The Greek cities of Ionia, located along the coast of Asia Minor, rose in revolt, supported by Athens and Eretria. The rebellion was crushed, but Darius was enraged by Athens' defiance. According to legend, he ordered a servant to remind him daily, "Master, remember the Athenians." This vow would ignite one of history's most famous rivalries, the Greco-Persian Wars. By the end of Darius's reign, Persia had become the largest and most advanced empire the world had ever seen. Its borders stretched from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea, its economy thrived, and its administration set standards that future empires, from Rome to Byzantium, would imitate. Under Darius the Great, Persia was not just powerful, it was organized, wealthy, and truly imperial. By the closing years of Darius the Great's reign, the Persian Empire had reached its golden age. Its borders stretched from the valleys of the Indus River to the shores of the Aegean Sea, uniting countless peoples under one crown. But at the empire's western edge, a spark was about to ignite a fire that would burn for generations. The trouble began in Ionia, a coastal region of Asia Minor inhabited by Greek city-states that had fallen under Persian control during the conquests of Cyrus the Great. For decades, the Persians had allowed these cities to govern themselves, so long as they paid tribute and obeyed imperial authority. But over time, resentment grew. The imposition of Persian-appointed tyrants clashed with the Greek ideal of civic independence. In 500 BCE, that tension finally broke. The city of Miletus rebelled against Persian rule, led by its ambitious tyrant Aristagoras, who, ironically, turned against the very empire that had supported him. To save himself, Aristagoras sought allies among his fellow Greeks. He traveled to mainland Greece, appealing to Athens and Eretria for aid. Moved by shared identity and wary of Persian power, both cities agreed to help. With Athenian and Eretrian troops at his side, Aristagoras struck back, marching inland and setting fire to Sardis, the Persian provincial capital. Though the fortress held, the city itself was burned, and the insult was unforgivable. When news reached Darius, he was enraged. According to Herodotus, the great king took up his bow, fired an arrow into the sky, and vowed vengeance upon Athens. He then commanded a servant to whisper to him each day, "Master, remember the Athenians." Over the next several years, Darius crushed the Ionian revolt city by city. By 494 BCE, the rebellion was finished. The decisive blow came at Lade, a naval battle near Miletus. The Ionian fleet, weakened by disunity and betrayal, collapsed under the Persian attack. Miletus was destroyed, its people deported, its rebellion silenced. But Darius had not forgotten who had dared to interfere. In 490 BCE, he launched a retaliatory invasion, a campaign not only to punish Athens and Eretria, but to bring the Greek mainland under Persian rule. A great fleet sailed across the Aegean, capturing Naxos and Eretria with ease. The Persians then landed at the Bay of Marathon, a broad plain northeast of Athens. There, waiting for them, stood the Athenian army, joined by a small force from Plataea. They were vastly outnumbered, but they had one advantage: unity. Their commander, Miltiades, a former general who had once served under Persian command, knew their tactics and terrain. The battle that followed would echo through history. When the Persians advanced across the plain, the Athenians launched a daring frontal assault. The center of their line wavered under Persian pressure, but the flanks held strong, encircling and crushing the invaders. In a matter of hours, the seemingly invincible Persian army was in retreat. Thousands of Persian soldiers lay dead. Athens had lost only a few hundred. It was a victory so astonishing that it seemed touched by the gods. The Battle of Marathon became a symbol of courage, of freedom, and of defiance against overwhelming odds. For the Greeks, it proved that the Persians could be beaten. For the Persians, it was a warning that this small, stubborn land at the edge of their empire would not yield easily. Darius, though still powerful, now faced rebellion in Egypt and unrest elsewhere in his realm. Before he could renew his campaign against Greece, he died in 486 BCE, leaving behind an empire at its peak, but with unfinished business. The task of vengeance and the dream of subduing Greece would pass to his son and successor, Xerxes. When Darius the Great died in 486 BCE, the Persian Empire was at the height of its power. It was the largest realm the world had ever seen, spanning from India to Egypt, from the Caucasus to the Aegean Sea. But one goal remained unfinished: the conquest of Greece. The responsibility now fell to Xerxes I, Darius's son and heir. Born into privilege and prophecy, Xerxes was determined to complete what his father had begun. He was ambitious, proud, and unyielding, the very image of a Persian king. But before turning west, Xerxes first had to secure his throne. Egypt had rebelled once more, seizing the chaos following Darius's death. In his first years, Xerxes crushed the revolt with brutal precision, reasserting Persian authority along the Nile. Only then did he begin preparations for the greatest military campaign the ancient world had ever witnessed. For 4 years, Xerxes gathered resources and men from every corner of his empire: Persians, Medes, Babylonians, Egyptians, Phoenicians, Indians, and Scythians. Each nation brought its weapons, ships, and traditions, forming an army of astonishing scale. Greek sources speak of over 2 million soldiers, though modern historians suggest a smaller, yet still immense, force of hundreds of thousands. To cross into Greece, Xerxes ordered the construction of 2 massive engineering marvels. At the Hellespont, where Asia meets Europe, Persian engineers built 2 floating bridges of ships lashed together with cables. When a storm destroyed the first attempt, Xerxes famously had the sea itself whipped and branded with hot irons, as if punishing it for defying him. The second bridge succeeded, and in 480 BCE, the Persian host began its march into Greece, an unstoppable wave of men, horses, and war machines. But the Greeks would not submit without a fight. Though divided by rivalries and politics, city-states such as Athens and Sparta formed a fragile alliance. They knew they could not face Persia head-on in open plains. They needed strategy and sacrifice. The first stand came at Thermopylae, a narrow mountain pass whose name means the Hot Gates. Here, a small Greek force blocked the path of Xerxes' massive army. Leading them was King Leonidas of Sparta, with just 300 Spartan warriors and a few thousand allies from other city-states. They knew they could not win, but they also knew that their courage could buy Greece precious time. For 3 days, the Greeks held Thermopylae. The Spartans' discipline and armor outmatched Persian numbers in the narrow pass. But betrayal struck. A local man named Ephialtes revealed a secret mountain path that allowed the Persians to outflank the defenders. Surrounded, Leonidas dismissed most of his allies and fought to the death with his remaining men. Though defeated, their stand became immortal. The sacrifice at Thermopylae inspired all of Greece. It showed that even the mightiest empire could be resisted by courage and unity. Xerxes pressed onward. Athens was evacuated, its people fleeing to nearby islands. The Persians swept into the city, burned the Acropolis, and seemed unstoppable. But the Greeks had one last move left, a trap set at sea. At the narrow straits of Salamis, the outnumbered Greek navy lured Xerxes' massive fleet into confined waters. The Persian ships, larger and slower, became easy targets for the agile Greek triremes. As chaos erupted, Greek rams shattered Persian hulls, and the tide of battle turned. From a golden throne set upon the shore, Xerxes watched as his grand fleet, his pride and power, was destroyed before his eyes. Humiliated but not broken, Xerxes withdrew most of his army back to Asia, leaving a force behind to continue the war. But the following year, in 479 BCE, the remaining Persian troops met the united Greek armies at Plataea. There, the Greeks won a final, decisive victory, ending the Persian invasion once and for all. The great king's dream of conquering Greece had died, but the Persian Empire endured. Despite defeat, it remained vast, wealthy, and influential. For the Greeks, these wars became a legend, a story of freedom against tyranny. For the Persians, it was a reminder that even empires have limits. Xerxes returned to Persepolis, his power intact but his confidence shaken. He devoted the rest of his reign to monumental building projects, grand palaces, gates, and reliefs celebrating Persia's glory. But behind the splendor, unrest simmered. He was assassinated in 465 BCE, a tragic end to a ruler who had commanded the greatest army the world had ever seen. After the death of Xerxes I in 465 BCE, the Persian Empire stood at a crossroads. It was still the largest and richest kingdom on earth. Its lands stretched from the Mediterranean to India, its palaces glimmered with gold, and its name alone commanded awe. But beneath that splendor, cracks were beginning to form. Xerxes had been murdered in his own palace, assassinated in a court conspiracy led by his minister Artabanus. Power now passed to his son, Artaxerxes I, a young ruler forced to navigate betrayal, rebellion, and the ghosts of his father's failures. Under Artaxerxes, the empire held together, but barely. He faced constant uprisings, in Egypt, in Bactria, and among the restless satraps who ruled far from the royal court. Each rebellion was crushed, but the cost was high. The once unbreakable unity forged by Cyrus and Darius was fading, replaced by political intrigue and regional ambition. Meanwhile, to the west, the Greeks, once divided and terrified, had changed. Their victory over Persia had ignited a new confidence. City-states like Athens grew powerful, forming the Delian League, a coalition that pushed Persian influence out of the Aegean. Though Persia continued to meddle in Greek affairs through diplomacy and gold, it never again held the dominance it once had over Ionia. For decades, the empire endured under a succession of kings, Xerxes II, Sogdianus, and Darius II, but each reign grew weaker than the last. The royal court at Persepolis became a center of luxury and intrigue rather than leadership. Satraps ruled like independent monarchs in the provinces. Corruption spread through the bureaucracy, and loyalty was bought with silver rather than earned through faith. Even so, the Persian world was not yet finished. Under Artaxerxes II, the empire found a momentary stability. He reigned for nearly half a century, the longest of all Achaemenid kings. During his time, Persia regained influence in Greek politics by funding rival city-states to fight each other. Gold, not swords, became its weapon. But while diplomacy kept enemies divided, it did little to heal Persia's own internal decay. By the time Artaxerxes III took the throne in the 4th century BCE, rebellion had become routine. Egypt once again broke free, forcing the great king to launch a brutal campaign to reclaim it. Though he succeeded, the empire's strength was waning. Every victory drained its resources, every year deepened its fatigue. And then came Darius III, the last of the Achaemenid kings. He inherited a realm still vast, but fractured beyond repair. Satraps acted independently, mercenaries replaced loyal troops, and the royal authority was more symbolic than real. Yet Darius did not know that beyond the western horizon, a new power was rising, one that would change the course of history forever. In Macedonia, a young king named Alexander had united the Greek world under his command. Brilliant, fearless, and driven by destiny, he looked eastward, toward the greatest empire the world had ever known. His ambition, to conquer Persia and claim its throne. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hellespont, the same strait Xerxes had bridged a century and a half earlier. Where once the Persians had invaded Greece, now Greece marched into Persia. The roles of conqueror and defender were reversed. At the Battle of Granicus, the Persian satraps fell one by one. A year later, at Issus, Alexander met Darius III face to face. Despite commanding a larger army, Darius was outmaneuvered. His forces broke, and he fled the field, leaving behind his family and treasure. The great king's authority shattered in an instant. Alexander pressed onward. He swept through Phoenicia, conquered Egypt, and then turned east to face Darius again at Gaugamela in 331 BCE, a battle that sealed Persia's fate. There, in the open plains near modern-day Iraq, Darius assembled his final, massive army, chariots, cavalry, and war elephants ready for war. But Alexander's tactics, precision, and speed proved unstoppable. The Persian lines collapsed, and Darius fled once more, this time for the last time. Soon after, he was betrayed and killed by his own men. When Alexander found his body, he ordered a royal burial, honoring the fallen king as an equal. With that act, the Achaemenid Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great 2 centuries earlier, came to an end. Alexander entered Persepolis, the heart of Persian glory. He gazed upon the palaces of Darius and Xerxes, the reliefs of kings and subjects, the inscriptions of divine rule, and then, in an act that remains debated to this day, he set the city ablaze. Some say it was revenge for the burning of Athens. Others believe it was a drunken mistake, or perhaps a symbolic gesture, the end of one world and the beginning of another. When the flames died, the empire of the Achaemenids was gone. But its legacy endured. Persia had given the world systems of administration, tolerance, and governance that would shape empires for centuries to come. From Cyrus's mercy to Darius's organization, from Persepolis's artistry to Zoroastrianism's moral philosophy, its influence lived on, woven into the fabric of history itself. The Persian Empire fell, but its spirit did not die. It became part of every civilization that followed, an eternal reminder that empires rise not only through conquest, but through vision, wisdom, and unity. Empires rise, and empires fall. But few have ever shaped the world as deeply as Persia. From the windswept plains of the Iranian plateau to the marble halls of Persepolis, the story of Persia was not merely about conquest, it was about vision. It was about a people who transformed scattered tribes into one of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history. 2,500 years ago, the Persians understood something the world would take centuries to learn, that true power is not in domination, but in unity. That greatness is not measured by the number of lands you rule, but by how you rule them. Under Cyrus, mercy was strength. Under Darius, order was power. Under Xerxes, ambition reached its limit. And through their triumphs and failures, Persia taught the world how empires could be built, not only with armies, but with ideas. Their roads became the veins of civilization, carrying trade, language, and knowledge across continents. Their coins united economies. Their administration inspired Rome. Their tolerance influenced generations of leaders, philosophers, and faiths. Even today, the echoes of that empire remain, in the languages we speak, the systems we follow, the art we admire, and the moral questions we still ask. For every civilization that came after Persia, every nation that sought to rule or unite, walked in the footsteps of Cyrus the Great. The empire may have turned to dust, its palaces reduced to stone, its kings long forgotten by time. But the idea of Persia endures. The idea that humanity can be diverse yet one, powerful yet just, strong yet merciful. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of all. Because long after the armies have vanished and the monuments have fallen, it's not conquest that survives. It's memory. It's meaning. It's the story. The story of a people who rose from the mountains of Iran and built a world that would never be the same again. The story of the Persian Empire. If this story moved you, don't let it fade here. Share it, comment your thoughts, and make sure to subscribe for more forgotten histories that shape the world we live in today. Because the past isn't gone, it's waiting to be remembered.